So we've got a pretty light agenda for this chat. Of course, Omni jumps in right here at the end after I say everyone can interrupt. Omni's not allowed to interrupt. I think Omni needs to not interrupt as much as he likes to. Pretty late agenda for this update. I want to talk about the War of the Spark PTR and kind of some of the feedback that came from that. Review the actual proposed changes I have from War of the Spark and talk through them and make sure I didn't miss anything resoundingly obvious, as I often like to miss. Open up the floor for some other cards that we can kind of talk about and maybe queue up or add to this update before it's finalized. I got some really specific and good feedback about the uncards, the silver bordered cards that I wanted to share and circle around with some thoughts on. And then, of course, if you want to yell at me about anything else, you always can do that at the end. So, without further ado, let's jump into it. The PTR, as it was last time, was a really good experience. I had a ton of fun thinking about what I would change and why, and posting it out there to see what the feedback would be. Ooh, we're getting a little noise.
Sorry, I'll go on mute.
Yeah, just hop off mute whenever you got something to add. No worries. Thank you. The PTR was I think successful. I was able to take all of the proposed changes plus others that I wanted to make for the War update, test them in Boston, and in the kind of the lead up to and then after a weekend with some friends playing Magic in Boston, I finalized the update. And what the PTR really led me to conclude was a lot of the changes that I've been thinking about were kind of long overdue. Other than kind of some feedback about people liking Goblin Freerunner and thinking maybe that's not the best spot for Raging Crunch, which, spoiler alert, I came to agree with. Overall, kind of continuing to push the cube towards the archetypes that we've just kind of refreshed. Blue-green ramp, blue-red spells, getting to go big, do multiple things in a turn, have a lot of fun with that. People really like. I think the most contentious change that I looked at that I didn't kind of back down from was Vivians Grizzly for Basking Rootwalla, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when I go through all of the war changes. But I did want to ask quick if anybody had a chance to do any testing of their own, any updates.
Just drafting on Cube Tutor, not anything in real life or actual drafts.
Yeah, it's always really helpful when you do those mock drafts and kind of talk about cards you were looking for and why you were looking for them. I found it really insightful that I think all of the changes that were in the PTR were changes that would have made the decks better.
I have a question that I've had for a while about the cube, and one of them is I draft it mostly 1v1 with my son, and it seems like there's a lot of white removal in the 3-drop slot when it comes to like the pacifism or O-ring style effects. I was wondering whether we were looking into reducing the amount of removal so that it doesn't go as late.
Yeah, so removal density is something that I've gotten some feedback on, and it's one of the last kind of concessions to the philosophy that Cube should have really powerful cards. I've cut overwhelmingly powerful things, Sprout Swarm, Fireball, Rolling Thunder, a bunch of really kind of game-breaking ways to play, and ultimately with ways to pay off sacrificing creatures with so many token creatures. Now, really go wide is pretty common in a lot of decks, just even incidentally. I think that, a single arrest, weighs a little bit less than it did, maybe a year ago or even the year before that. I I'm hesitant to cut and swap the removal because I'm not exactly sure what I swap it for. I'm kind of open to figuring out, should there be more creatures and a little less removal? Should the removal be toned down? Should it be shaped different? More 4 and 5 mana removal like current limited sets often have. I think it's one of the questions that, I understand kind of why it comes up, but I struggle to find something that leads me to kind of like a stronger vision for the cube.
That's fair. My normal archetype, and it might be just because I know my son prefers aggro, is my preferred archetype to draft against him is like Esper Control, and I never seem to lack for removal at all. And maybe it's just I need to teach my son to draft something that can beat Esper Control.
Yeah, it's definitely a little bit different when you're heads up drafting and you're in 2 colors that you can just, half of the best cards in those colors are removal spells, plus all the bounce from blue. I can see how it can kind of add up. It's a little bit different. Winchester versus like an 8-player draft.
Yeah, our typical draft is like Pancake or something like that. But yeah, I really do need to draft the Pauper Cube like 8-way and see how it goes there.
Yeah, I mean, there's still plenty of removal. Don't get me wrong, but I've played plenty of decks. Like I drafted a blue-white deck, and there were 2 other people drafting blue-white elsewhere. One was the same kind of archetype, like 3 seats down from me, and then somebody else was kind of speculating in and pulling a lot of the white removal out. You can get into a situation where, it looks like there's a lot of removal when you're heads up, but if you're not fighting over the same cards, they're naturally going to be there for you. Versus in an 8-player draft, it's not uncommon for me to end up pinched in a color because it's getting drafted 3 ways and I'm just not getting the best removal or creatures around. For example, I pulled out Cage of Hands, which is a 3 mana removal spell, and in that pack were 2 5 white flying creatures, Supply Line Cranes and Chivalrous Chevalier. I thought for sure at least one of them would table because there were other reasonable white cards in there. The card I got back was the 3-drop that creates a 1/1 spirit. It's a 2/1 and it makes a 1/1 spirit, which was totally great in my deck, but I really, really wanted a 5-drop. And so it's been a little more hit or miss for me to have too much removal, which, what I don't want to get is a weird situation where players don't end up having access to some cards just because there's so few of them.
All right, that's good.
Yeah, something to continue thinking about. I've definitely felt like the as fan for removal is very high, but the play experience has been fine, and that kind of dichotomy makes me think about it a little bit. Sandstep Outcast, boy, I love that card. It's so much fun to flicker that card. All right, so I'm going to jump into the proposed updates. I'm going to run down all of them, and then we can talk about other war cards or other ideas. I'm pretty sure there's some blue cards on everyone's lips based on the discussion leading up to this. So let's go with the first one, which is, I think, one of the I think it's constructed playable. Rune Law Enforcer. It's a tapper. We all know what tappers do, but I think it's time for a little bit of die rolling to go, and I don't think anybody's gonna be really sad to see a silver bordered card bite the bullet. I really, really like Go to Jail, and I like that it feels very similar to a Sorcerer Speed Swords to Plowshares without a downside. But the play experience has been really wild. It's not unusual to see a creature come back right away, or for it to just, you roll and roll and roll. And not get it back. And so the variance, the RNG on that is really not controllable. And ultimately it's not been as fun or as consistent as, just having a tapper. Plus a 1/2 tapper and Law Rune Enforcer is really good. I think that being able to block a 1/1 token or a 1/1 on the first turn matters. Being able to pair up with a 2-drop to block something with Menace or one of the other aggressive decks is the kind of tapper that I think subtly works really well for a control deck, because the creatures that scare it most are the bigger ones, the haste creatures, and all of those are going to be 2 or more mana.
I like a lot that this one gets around the tap your tapper to do the thing, where if we had so many tappers that was going on, that would feel annoying, but this prevents.
Yeah, I can't type tonight. The Enforcer is better, more skill testing. Yeah, it's it doesn't work against tokens, and so ostensibly in War of the Spark Limited, right, it doesn't tap an army, right? You can't stop a 10/10 token army from smashing your face in. But in the Pauper Cube, it's, I think, just better than the other 2 tappers we have. It just survives more things. It can block better. It can pretty much tap anything that's relevant. But the only thing you're not going to tap is like some of the ramp tokens. Yeah, and most of the tokens are 1/1. You are right, Omni. One of the things that stood out to me was White hasn't seen a lot of changes over the years, and that's something I need to take another look at. I think that there have been kind of subtle shifts to White, but its core removal really hasn't been replaced or updated, and its core kind of top end, some of the big flyers, they've changed, but they're functionally very similar. And so that was something that somebody observed and shared, that White seems pretty samey compared to how red and blue and even black have kind of taken some big leaps. Green is totally different with its ramping base. So I guess it's kind of an open question to look at later, is what should White do? And speaking of White not changing, that's the only change I have for White. The next one I think should make a lot of Dirtle players happy is swapping Erratic Visionary in for Seeker of Insight. So, Merfolk Looter is busted. There's a human wizard version. Both were in the cube together at one point, and it was very, very good. It was very difficult if one came down on turn 2, and if you didn't kill it immediately or find some way to take it out. The card advantage from filtering and having more relevant cards more often added up very quickly. What I wanted to do was change the texture of that playing. So by cutting them out and then trying Seeker of Insight and some of the other kind of card filtering effects that aren't quite as good, Control is still great, and I don't think anybody complains about blue not having good stuff to do, but you end up with less, let me grind out this card advantage over and over and over. Seeker of Insight blocks well, comes down on turn 2, kind of hits a lot of the early things that blue wants in a creature, but I think Erratic Visionary just plays better. It's really, really hard to use Seeker of Insight. That's feedback I've gotten, and it's not Merfolk Looter, but from drafting a blue-white deck and throwing Erratic Visionary in, just the card filtering, even at 2 mana a pop, is good, and I really, really liked it. And I think this answers a lot of the issues that people had with trying to use Seeker of Insight. Multiple people are typing. Oh, thumbs up. Oh, easy. Great, everybody likes my changes. This is super. Difficult to end step. Exactly. And Erratic Visionary lets you do that. It lets you bluff having mana up. It lets you keep mana up for a bounce spell. And if the opponent doesn't do anything with it, you can efficiently use your mana. It still fills the same role, but it requires resources and a choice, right? If you keep the mana up and then don't do anything with it, and you don't have a card that you want to discard, you still can't actually use the Visionary, just like a Merfolk Looter. So it keeps all of the major upsides, which is what I like about it.
Also, for what it's worth, most of the instants in blue are more than 2 mana, so this probably actually works out better on rate.
Yeah, there's a lot of bounce spells at 2 mana, but most of the big things that you want to do, especially with like bounce spells with kicker, like blink of an eye. You want to draw that card, you want to have that 4 mana, but you have other things that you can do with a spare 2 mana now. And I tested it myself, and it was awesome. By the third game, most opponents were killing it on the spot because they recognize that even at the slower speed and the mana investment, the card filtering just added up very quickly. So the next change probably surprises nobody that knows how much I like Eldrazi Sky Spawner. Even Eternal is basically a Sky Spawner. Makeshift Mauler is big, but kind of a hanger-on from the old, Graveyard Matters theme. There aren't really cards that put cards into the graveyard, especially creature cards. And if this was Exile, if this was Delve, I think Makeshift Mauler would still be in. I think a 4/5, I think a beefy creature in blue that's at a reasonable cost is something blue could use. But getting a creature in the graveyard was just very tough. Blue has the fewest creatures, has the fewest ways of putting them there. And ultimately, I think the Mauler was just kind of sitting out in more games than it was seeing play. I can't remember the name of the flyer version. There is a flyer that exiles a creature card. But and that one still sees play because a big flyer matters.
Stitch Drake.
Yeah, Stitch Drake is just a big flyer, and people, that because it's flying, it adds a lot more value over a 4/5 on the ground that can kind of get stonewalled. So I'm not completely out of giving blue things to do and kind of bigger creatures for good rate with the creature condition, but Stitch Drake is something you play on turn 6 and you're just as happy as if you were able to curve it out on turn 3. Even Eternal should play out the same way that Sky Spawner does. Make a flying body, get some tempo in. It works well with bounce effects, works well against bounce decks, works well to provide some buffers. Being able to put 3 power down for 3 mana in blue, 2 in the air is a pretty aggressive rate. And I'm excited for this kind of power level in commons going forward. Does this push blues flying too much? That's a good question. Green has a couple spiders, or a couple reach creatures. Specifically, Penumbra Spider is still absolutely monstrous against blue decks. Just really, really hard to get rid of that thing. White has a ton of flyers. Black has pretty good removal. Black's sweeper effects, Pestilence, Crypt Rats, and Evankar's Justice do a pretty good job of sweeping away a lot of blue's flyers. They're smaller. White kind of has most of the bigger end flyers. The 3/3s, the 2/4s that can be a 3/5. Those are much tougher to deal with. Blue has to win somehow, and I guess the question is if it's not flying creatures, what would blue's creatures look like? And that's an honest question. I'm not, blue has the weakest creatures otherwise, and so I'm not sure. Outside of having some efficient flyers or flyers that come with bonus effects, Skid Incrustation is great, and that's why that's a great example. It got added to the cube. It's good in ramp, good in control. It's a 2/3 for 3, which is fair, but becoming a 6/7 with hexproof is just nice, just super nice. And Skitter Incrustation's pretty alone in being able to do that. There aren't a lot of, I think, potent blue creatures that can kind of replace a lot of the flying creatures that make blue kind of scary in a tempo deck. So the next change I want to hit on is Mini Mana War. Callous Dismissal is Mini Mana War. It's a 2 mana Mana War, kinda. if you squint and turn your head a little bit. Looking at bounce effects, I'm trying to keep them 1-for-1, and Leave in the Dust is, I think, one of the weaker bounce effects. It's really redundant. There's 2 other ways to do the effect. Those 2 other ways scale. You can cast it for 2 or 4 mana. You don't have to draw the card. I think just the rate. Yeah, the rate. Now you trade speed. I think there's enough blue instant bounce that you're not going to miss just one spell, particularly when it replaces itself with a creature on the battlefield, and lets you go infinite with Mnemonic Wall, which I think everyone's favorite thing to do for some reason is just go infinite with some blue nonsense. But Callous Dismissal, Mini Mana War, I'm super excited. It played out pretty well. It was pretty clutch for basically at the Boston testing group. Buddy of mine drafted what I call the best black. It had Justice, Pestilence, and Crypt Rats. It was basically mono black, and it splashed a little bit of white, or a little bit of blue, I think, for Callous Dismissal and something else, and it splashed a little bit of red, I think, for just Pyrotechnics. So basically, like, just the best control deck I can imagine building from a creature control standpoint. And Callous Dismissal was absolutely critical. Being able to bounce and make a creature was the rate that it needed. Has anybody have a Callous Dismissal story? Because I feel like everybody likes the card, but it's a sorcery. Like I forgot it was a sorcery because I'm used to every bounce spell being a bounce spell. But how good is it in War of the Spark Limited? I like that everybody types for these. The play pattern, and remove your blocker. Yeah.
They're getting taken quite highly. I haven't seen many going around.
It's also one of the ways to answer an army. I think there's 2 bounce spells. There's this one, and then there's the blue-black one that's like destroy creature with converted mana cost 3 or less, bounce something, or it's like a modal blue-black spell. It's an uncommon. I'm trying to remember. Tyrant Scorn, yeah. Yeah, I remember that because I had both that and Callous Dismissal in one of my decks, and I tried to play the Dismissal like I did the Scorn, and I ate like 5 damage instead. It was not effective.
I've found that it's better in blue-black. I've found that in red-blue, for example, the one that puts counters on and makes unblockable is more effective with the proliferate mechanic.
Yeah, War is such a weird format. Proliferate just makes counters matter so much more. I'm kind of jealous because I wish I could have that kind of experience in the cube, but without changing like I think 40 cards at once, I don't think it would happen. I do have another 2 mana spell from UG now counters. It would be, yeah, Omni. If I wanted it in, it would be in Bant colors for sure, and it would basically overhaul the overhaul that we just went through. Also, all of the good counter stuff is at uncommon and blue-green, so, that problem still exists. But Kasmina's Transmutation is not a problem that exists. It's a real card, and, I think it will overperform in the Pauper Cube versus a format where, there aren't that many activated abilities. And some of the biggest threats are just a token army that's going to keep growing. Kasmina's Transmutation doesn't stop an army, which makes sense in the context of what they're trying to do in War of the Spark Limited. But for our cube here, there's a ton of great activated abilities. Like if you're trying to be an erratic visionary, Kasmina's Transmutation solves your problem for you. Somebody's got an Eldrazi, just transmute it. It functions very, very similar to a pacifism in blue. Obviously, it has the downside of letting your opponent keep blocking, letting your opponent, keeps the downside of other auras, like sacrifice effects, don't care. Like, okay, you shrink my one creature, I'm going to go ahead and just sacrifice it and keep beating you down with my other. It answers tappers. Yeah, that little loses all abilities really matters. I honestly, originally when I drafted this up, I was cutting claustrophobia just because I hate writing claustrophobia, and water knot is just easier to like tell people. It's been printed more recently. And then I actually looked it up, and I think claustrophobia actually has 3 foil printings, which I felt was a little more helpful for people putting together the cube and wanting to get a cool version of it. And people really like Innistrad, and they don't really like water attacking a pirate. Although it reminds me of like weird Tempest art. It's also by Wayne Reynolds, so I guess that would be why it reminds me of weird Tempest art. It kind of looks like Gerard getting ripped off of a boat. Waterknot does, but I really don't like splitting the difference in removal effects, right? Like Kesmia's Transmutation and Waterknot are functionally different. That was my signed Patreon card. Oh boy, yeah. Yeah, that's the problem with cutting your darlings. I'm 100. I've already cut cards that I've sent signed to people. Sorry, that happens with a cube. But one of the things I'm uncomfortable with swapping out Kesmia's Transmutation is just it doesn't function. It's not actually functionally the same. With Waterknot, if you find a way to untap a creature or you have some other ability that lets you untap it. You actually get to block with it and do stuff versus, Transmutation is kind of just, just makes it a 1/1 token basically, which is good, but I really wish that both of those cards kind of did the same thing, which is why I looked for a long time at Foul Play and decided not to make that switch because people have irrational hate of silver bordered cards, but I really wish they both played out the same way. Like, blue doesn't lock your creature down. It just makes it irrelevant. It just makes it a little dork. And I feel like that would be a very fair thing to see going forward. So I'm optimistic that this will get fixed in the future, but it's it is what it is now. I think a 2-mana removal spell is just better than a 3-mana double blue removal spell. But something I'm thinking about. I really like the consistency in colors having the same answers for things. Blade Speaker. Never get too attached to a weapon. You must allow a better one to find its way to you. That is Cube Philosophy 101. Cut your darlings. So who likes Lazotep Reaver in War of the Spark Limited? Because I couldn't draft one to save my life. I think on day 1 everybody knew that card was pretty decent. Is good. Multiple people are typing. Yeah, making 2/3 in power for 2 mana in black is apparently good. Yeah, everybody's still typing. It's not unparalleled, just solid. Helped me a bunch. Hadn't had a chance to play more limited, but it was nice for black. Yeah. So Last Step Reaver fits right into multiple kind of archetype things that black likes to do. If you want sacrifice payoffs, you get 2 creatures for 2 mana in black. It's essentially better rate than Goblin. Than the Goblin, make Goblin 2 mana cards. It's better rate than the white make 2 creature cards. Black now has the best version of that. Oh yeah, you can also get it back with Gravedigger, which is pretty good. I like Pitkeeper. I like being able to loop and do dumb things with Pitkeeper in a full graveyard, but I think the Reaver just does more of what you want. It gets you your bodies up front. It recurs, just like Pitkeeper does. You know, uh, not Exhume. There's the 1 mana black, get a creature back from the graveyard when it costs 3 or less with cycling. That if you cycle, I think I literally shed a tear every time somebody cycles that in a draft. Yeah, unearthing a Lazadep Reaver in a sacrifice deck just seems gross. Just so many bodies from 2 cards. I think that speaks for itself, and kind of in the same vein. I didn't know people didn't like Driver of the Dead as much. I thought Driver of the Dead was always pretty solid. There's a lot of 2-drop creatures that have a lot of payoff, and arguably adding Lazatep Reaver is a reason to keep Driver of the Dead around. It's just a really good way to get it back. I will agree with the feedback that its body for 4 mana is kind of a little lacking, and needing the creature in the graveyard to pay off with is sometimes annoying. It doesn't always have the creature. You don't always have the right kind of creature. So looking at looking at a mass and just simplifying the transaction where you just get a 2/2 back, and you don't have to worry about trying to find a payoff card or have something already in the graveyard for it, I think helps this a lot. If you're in a sacrifice deck, if you're in a control deck, you just get to keep marching along with bodies. And I see Driver of the Dead better in kind of corner case scenarios. I don't see people wanting to draft it, and play it more than Dread of the Horde or Herald of the Dread Horde. Yeah, Driver does sit better with other utility creatures. Although that's also why Exhume is still in the cube, which gets more utility creatures. So I want to keep moving along, so we don't end up with like a 3-hour recording. I think it was like 2 hours last time. So Tidebearer Giant for Soul Stinger was in the PTR, I think. Yeah, it was in the PTR. I made the change. The player who drafted it in Boston said it was just awesome. Like, it felt really good to have that as like a top end where it just replaces itself, just kind of keeps control moving along. I always like Soul Stinger because it's actually quietly a black sacrifice payoff. You end up with like a 1/1 dork, like say an army. You get to cash in the army for a 4/5 for 4. But again, that feels just very, very similar to the Makeshift Mauler kind of rate, right? Like, I think that is Makeshift Mauler rate. But now you have to have the creature in play rather than just a creature card in the graveyard, which can arguably be harder for some decks. So I like leaning into giving black the ability to draw cards. I think that making black the control color, giving it the ability to draw cards, but of course having the drawback of having to pay life for that along the way, feels like a good balance, right? Like, how do you make Pestilence control decks good? Give it card draw. How do you balance that out? Make the downside it has less life to pay for Pestilence. It feels like good rate and a good body, and I think that Tidebearer Giant's gonna fit just fine in some of the control decks.
Only thing I would say about this one is, I think Soul Stinger is a card that demands a little bit more skill to use. So it would be nice to make sure that we don't cut all the cards, that don't need a little bit of setup and a little bit of thought into how they work. Just a thought.
Yeah, it's kind of jumping ahead to the Ghostly Flicker displacer, whatever the other version of Ghostly Flicker is. I'm not remembering it off the top of my head. I do want to find ways to weave some interesting effects and setup back in. I definitely think that it is displace. Great, I actually have a memory that works. Thanks, Running Monkeys. I think I agree with that. I don't want the cube just to become who has the best pile of creatures in removal, which at a glance, that's one of the criticisms of the cube. But I think that once people play with it, they discover there's a lot more subtle things going on. And speaking about cards that require more thought and more setup, I'm looking forward to seeing Totally Evasion be just an absolute, gotcha card out of control decks. I really cut back on some of the discard and made some of the discard a lot of setup, like, you've got to attack first to even get a card to discard from Deadeye, and the opponent still chooses. Totally Invasion is exactly kind of what a thoughtful, blue-black control deck would want to do. Like, let me look at your hand, let me take a relevant card away. I can't take a land, but I can take, the card that I'm going to find really annoying, really obnoxious, and I get a body for it, which is going to get in the way, slow things down. It's, a 1-for-1 swap, but I think Totally Invasion is going to make a lot more decks than Deadeye Tormentor. And I think Totally Invasion is going to be a lot stronger than Deadeye Tormentor in a lot of decks. And if Wizards keeps putting, reveals their hand, choose a card type effects at common now, I think that that's going to help add more of that kind of thoughtful effect, where, unlike him to Torak, right? Like, if you're in black, you just jam it in, it's thoughtless, there's no real setup for it, right? Like, did I get you or not? You're playing roulette. This is now, I have to choose from what I see. Now I know what I'm playing against, and it adds to that, skill testing factor. It's obviously strong, but making the right choice and then making the right decisions based off the information you have definitely plays into that type of let's think about it, let's set it up gameplay, which I do like, even if it's not my best style of play. So for as much as I like haste, I really like good 1-drops better in red. I think one of the strongest red based decks are the red decks that have a curve that stops at 3. I've drafted a 15 land red white deck and red black deck before. I've seen other people draft like the 15 land red deck. It's scary how quickly the deck can kind of just steamroll into an early game. And of course, like, if you pump the brakes and you get it to stop, it's really hard for that deck to overcome a good defense and a good counterplay. So which I ran into. One of the Boston drafters drafted basically mono red, splashing I think a little bit of white or a little bit of green. He could kind of build it either way. And I sided in some more defensive things just to be able to tap the brakes harder. And that was how I kind of stole the second game. Was I put up enough roadblocks and kind of anticipated what that deck could do to bump me. Tenement Crasher has been in the sideboards for a long time. It's just a big 6-mana thud, I think. But what was fascinating was Grim Initiate didn't actually make any of the decks in Boston. It like tabled the draft. It was like a last pick, and the player who was in the black deck asked me, what deck is Grim Initiate for? And I pointed out that there's really powerful aggressive decks. First strike with equipment adds up really quick. Grim Initiate into turn 2 Bone Splitter is basically make your own replaceable Porcelain Legionnaire. and with the black sacrifice payoffs, this is kind of the new black red identity. curve out with some good red and black creatures, back it up with some burn and removal, be willing to throw your creatures away for the win. And that kind of go all out is a little bit, very similar to the red-white kind of go all out flavor, but it definitely feels very black to be willing to just, to throw your creatures in and push the opponent down to where a burn spell or, one big Phyrexian Ghoul just kind of eats the last of their blockers. Because you have, an extra army, an extra initiate, both to throw away. And that's what's really nice about some of the dies, amass creatures, is you get to do it twice in one combat. So the combat math on, Phyrexian Ghoul actually gets really awkward when there's two when this creature dies amass creatures. But of course it also makes instant speed removal really good. So that willingness to risk reward is, I think, what makes black so fun to play, and so hard to, you just have to predict what your opponent has and make the right call. So Burning Prophet, I don't know if you've played War Limited much. I did a couple drafts when I was in London, and Burning Prophet consistently impressed me. A 1/3 for 2, blocks well, and just making every single trick you have to play better. As it turns out, when you scry one like 5 times in a game, it adds up really quick. And anybody, I played against somebody who went turn 2 Burning Prophet, turn 3 Burning Prophet, turn 4 played 2 spells, and I just felt like I was never back in the game after that. So I really want to get Burning Prophet in. I think blue red, or more controlling builds of like Grixis red black really will appreciate having this kind of early card. But finding the right creature to cut for it took some time. I thought about, I think in the PTR I had a different creature listed. No, I have Goblin Trailblazer over here. Okay, I was thinking about a different creature before I settled on Trailblazer. Trailblazer's Menace has actually been really good, and it gets much better with equipment. Again, there's a little bit of a theme. Like if you have early Bone Splitters, black red is really great. All of black and red's weaknesses, get flipped on its head when you have a little bit of equipment to play with your creatures. But I really didn't see anything else to replace red with. We've already kind of pared burn down to basically its essential core. There's actually a ton of great burn spells we could add back in. But burn does not need more help, more reach. The burn decks and burn spells are already very good. So I'm a little hesitant to kind of expand that section. And I like a lot of the other 2-drops in red. There aren't that many, but I think Burning Prophet will see more play than Goblin Trailblazer will. Oh man, would have been great to have like a Goblin Shaman instead. I agree. All right, I think this proposed change is gonna get some people. I think you're gonna have some feedback, so I'm ready. Raging Crunch has been super impressive. A 4/3 on the backstep just kind of shuts down a lot of aggressive decks, and alongside tokens, it just attacks really well. You pair this with Mog Flunkies, and like that curve just scares me. A 3/3 and a 4/3 attacking on turn 4 just sounds miserable to have to deal with, especially with removal or burn spells to back it up. I was racking my head for a while to figure out a card that had been underperforming and hadn't been living up to what I think it was. And I finally realized that Skirk Marauder has not been as powerful as I've kind of mentally shortcutted it to be. 6 mana is a lot. You get a shock and a 2/1. That's not bad. It's 6 mana, kill a 4-drop. You can probably for 6 mana you can trade with a Raging Crunch. You can trade with a that's about it actually. There aren't that many things that you can really 2-for-1 with a Marauder. 6 mana, deal with make 2 goblins. Even in the mirror kind of situation, the efficiency of 6 mana to just shock and have a 2/1 has really fallen off as the average power level of common creatures and removal has kind of gone up. And I've always just defaulted to grabbing Skirk Marauder. I've always had it mentally shortcut as a 2-for-1. And honestly, that hasn't been the case. And I think that it's finally time to say goodbye to one of the OG, Pauper cards that I haven't really thought about in a while, but honestly is just not as good as it could be. Yeah, Stormfleet Pyromancer is just everything you want, but actually just better. It's not better. I mean, obviously you need to be attacking, but getting a 3/2 is way different than a 2/1. And especially after attacking, you use 2 damage, finish off a big, a safe block. Like, okay, I'm gonna block your 1/1 with my 1/3. Okay, cool, that happens, and then you play this, you kill their 1/3, their erratic visionary or whatever they were trying to stay alive with, and you have a 3/2 to continue pressuring with on next turn. Very, very different than spending 6 mana and having a 2/1 where if I just play, say, I don't know, Callous Dismissal, bounce your other relevant thing and have a 1/1 to block with, answers it. So goes in Grixis control, but not much else. Yeah, the really slow decks like some of those effects, but they now have other toys to play with. You now get a 4/5 that replaces itself for 6 mana. I think that might actually be better. Here's another change off the PTR. I don't think anybody's going to miss Sarkhan's Rage. It was a 5 mana, deal 5 instant, which I think is something that gave red a little bit of texture. It actually had enough reach to kill, some of the tithe bearer giants of the Pauper cube world. Heartfire fits in. It gives red something to do to really play along with the 4 mana, not the 4 mana, the black red sacrifice effects kind of archetype. It gets around the, what dragons are in the cube? Well, you've got a changeling spell in black. Shrug. I think Heartfire, I saw Heartfire, I played against it in the Boston draft. It was good. It does what you think it does. It does give red a little interesting counterplay where the control deck thinks it's going to set up a 2-for-1 and instead it throws removal away and then eats 4 or its best blocker gets annihilated. So I think that is going to be interesting to see, the blowouts. Can we get back Act of Treason? I'm thinking about it. Yeah. It's a little bit of a weird fling, but you get to fling, a token for 4 instead of a token for 1. I think capping the damage and making it exactly 4 makes it stronger than fling for 99% of use cases in the cube. And I like fling, and I think that fling's a good comparison. Like, hey, what if you could fling the token and it actually did something? That's Heartfire, and I'm scared of this card a lot more than I am scared of Sarkhan's Rage, because 5 mana to tap out and kill me feels a little bit different than 2 mana, 2-for-1 my removal in response to my removal spell. Ugh. So the last red change, because red's got red and black get a lot of changes this update. Honor the God Pharaoh. So I've been looking at Tormenting Voice effects for a while. You know, Cathartic Reunion, Tormenting Voice has been reprinted like 3 times, and I kind of came around to the idea that it should probably be in the cube. It just feels like a good thing for red decks. It really helps the blue-red spell kind of decks, or the black-red, go all out kind of decks. You know, hey, I'm going to discard this land and draw 2, and hopefully draw some removal spells, or another things. Are there a lot of things you want to place in the graveyard? No, there really isn't. This is literally just good card filtering. Takes out a land, makes it into something else. But the difference is that Honor the God Pharaoh makes a creature, and it's very, very subtle. But I think that small difference makes it play much better. You know, just like Toll of the Invasion. You know, there are other look at your hand and take something out effects, but making something on the battlefield just plays better. It gives you something to do. It gives you a blocker. It supports control decks. It helps aggro decks get back into the swing of it. You know, if you're in red and you've got equipment, you know, hey, make a 1/1, draw into Bone Splitter and equip it. You are right back in the game, and that kind of feel I really like. Thundering Giant has been a weak haste creature for a while. I don't think anybody's surprised that it's going. Probably surprised it took that long. We have Delve things. Yeah, Honor the Pharaoh does work with Delve. You know, all those discard things do. There's the Apes in green and the Fish in black. You know, so if you're into that and you want to try to set that up, you know, that helps. But I think Honor the God Pharaoh stands on its own. In a slower deck, you can unapologetically get rid of something, get rid of an extra land or get rid of something you don't need, some big expensive card, draw into spells that you ideally do, or another land drop that you want to hit, and make a body that helps you stay in the game. Kind of figured it was going when it wasn't the swap for Crunch. Yeah, Thundering Giant was great for the Crunch, and I thought about that, and then I realized I could just make a much better card and kind of shift red a little bit towards the spell side for the blue-red spells. You know, I feel like blue and red should have slightly more spells than kind of other colors, so that way together they get the most kind of choices in color. So moving on to green, there's 2 changes in green. Vivians Grizzly, swapping for Basking Rootwalla. And this one I feel I'm a little mixed about. The madness cost on Basking Rootwalla obviously is a nice to have with some of the red discard effects. There's the red 1-drop that you can cash in, and of course now Honor the God Pharaoh. But madness really isn't something that we're trying to set up, in the cube. There aren't that many payoffs. There isn't a bunch of random discard. I remember I drafted a kind of a special limited, legacy kind of feel cube, and there were multiple copies of commons. And this was I want to say 5 years ago in DC. One of my buddies had a cube, and so he hymned me, and I randomly discarded 2 Basking Rootwallas. That felt great, but that's never going to happen in the Pauper cube. As a 1-drop, Basking Rootwalla is fine. Being able to pump 2 mana into it and make it a 3/3 is fine. What was his friend Wild Mongrel think? I think Wild Mongrel is its own good boy. Wild Mongrel makes black removal much worse, and it's entertaining to see black decks kind of jump through some hoops trying to figure out the best way to kill a Mongrel. But Rootwalla is not even a mana sink. It kind of fakes being a 3/3 a little bit, and then it probably just gets eaten by something. Again, the base power level of common creatures has kind of gone up over the years, and where Basking Rootwalla used to feel amazing, I think now it's just fine. And for a ramp deck, I'd rather give it a much more relevant body against tokens. A 2/3 looks much better than a 1/1 that you've got to pay 2 mana in if you're going to block with it. Otherwise, you're just trading, for half of a make 2 creature spell. But the ability to spend extra mana to maybe draw some creatures, I think helps a deck get back into it or overtake a game. I don't think Vivians Grizzly is actually good, but everyone talked about it and, believes that it's one of the, it is one of the few ways that you can make some card advantage in green. It's repeatable, it's a mana sink. I want to see how it plays out. I'm not willing to just say that, well, it's not good enough without testing it, and this is the best that I can offer for it, but I think that it'll make more decks than Basking Root Wall, and I think it'll do more things in decks than Basking Root Wall, which is at least a start. Just played it in the pre-release, but I never had it when I didn't have Arcbow, so I just used that. Yet, funny enough, I too had an Arcbow deck, and I'll be honest, I was very unimpressed by Arcbow in War Limited. It was good, but I didn't have a lot of enter the battlefield creatures, and I think that really took away from what the Arcbow could do, Maybe I just didn't draft a very good deck, which is likely. It was like my third draft or whatever, and maybe I didn't draft a very, the right kind of creatures to kind of pair up with it. Maybe blue green when you get to like Arcbow into a Bloom Elemental and proliferate in the middle of combat. After attackers are declared, just sounds nightmarish to have happen. So I think that the Arcbow's strong, but I wish I had given Vivians Grizzly a little bit of a try. So the last change is band together for Wild Instincts. I did not realize everyone hated Wild Instincts so much. I really like a +2/+2 fight. Hey, my creature's going to eat your creature and then attack and then probably hit you for 5 or 6 damage. That sequence felt great. And it felt fine for 3 mana. Band together, it has some corner case stuff. It plays better with, your 1/1 Death Touch creatures. It certainly plays better with like the 2/1 Death Touch Reach Elf that's in green already. It's an instant which messes up combat math, messes up removal. It does a lot of very interesting things. And so I think it's a net power increase for green, and that's okay. And I don't think anybody's going to disapprove of the change, but I really did like the play sequence that Wild Instinct led me to. I think band together meets the skill testing criteria. Yeah, absolutely. When you use it, which creatures you choose, the setting it up feels like a much bigger payoff. If you can catch your opponent in the wrong spot, suddenly band together just radically makes a combat go from being slightly unfavorable to a blowout. And doesn't get bounced in response to a bounce effect. Yeah. Does anybody know the rules? How does that work? So if I band together and I choose my two target creatures I control to deal damage, and one of them gets bounced, does last known information remember the power of the creature that got bounced, or is it just now the one creature punching? I know it still resolves. It doesn't fizzle. It would need to lose all 3 targets to fizzle, because it's targeting up to, at least 2, almost certainly 3 creatures. 2 of yours and 1 of your opponents. So fizzling's not a problem. It's the does it remember the creature? Creature isn't there to deal damage. Yeah, so that's what I thought. But it'd be really sweet if it remembered that its like ghostly brother creature was there to punch with them, like a little Gohan Goku killing Cell action. I can dream, right? That's all my updates. There are other great cards in War of the Spark. As it turns out, when the development team was like, yeah, so we had this idea just to like print more powerful commons and see how that goes. They printed a lot of good commons, and it sure is going. So, I'd love to spend a moment to kind of talk about some of the other cards that maybe you were thinking about. I think I know there's one card off the top of my mind is Ob Nixilis Cruelty. and somebody asked me, I think it was Omni, Omni being the true friend of the Pauper cube he is, asked me why I didn't think about this card. And honestly, we already have a bunch of great ways just to kill stuff in black. It's fine, it's good. Like, I like how it's one black instead of double black. Like, Murder versus this, one exiles the creature, but kind of caps at five toughness, which is totally fine for the cube. It kills, like, again, 99% of the stuff that you're worried about. It's not double black, which is why Murder is not in the cube. There's already too many double black cards. But, I cut Eyeblight's Ending, and Eyeblight's Ending kills, like, 95% of the stuff in the cube. So, I have a hard time going, why should I add this when it's really not materially changing the composition or feel of the removal in black. As a side note, and why I brought this card up is that I did get some feedback from, unsurprisingly, the mono black player, effectively the mono black player, the mono black splashing good stuff player from the Boston draft, was that they didn't see a lot of cards that exiled when it killed something, right? Like not Lava Spike. The deal 2 damage and it exiles. There's like two flavors of it. There's one that just deals 2 damage to a creature, and there's one that deals 2 damage to a creature or player. And if the creature dies, exile it. There's a handful of effects that have a marginal upside of like exiling things, and I think that matters. And that's something that I'm going to be thinking about, especially with Modern Horizons and some future updates, is, should the text change to help get rid of some things from the graveyard? There aren't a lot of payoff effects, but it does feel good to get rid of, something that your opponent's going to try to get back. It's fine removal spell with marginal upside. Assume we're talking about Ob-Nixilis Cruelty. We are, Usman. And that's the one thing that leads me back to Ob-Nixilis Cruelty is it worthwhile having removal that is probably just as good as what's already in the cube, but comes with like a marginal corner casey upside? I'm not sure. I don't see a lot of value in needing to exile creatures or get rid of them. There's a lot of now when this creature dies effects that, would matter. Exiling it instead of dying prevents that from happening, so it stops those. I'm not sure, but I just didn't see the need to add it. It didn't feel like it was, contextually making the cube better. I'm not about trying to just add cool new cards because they're cool and new. Maybe Vivians Grizzly aside for testing and kind of the overall hype factor, but I really don't see the value in just adding it in. You are always welcome to pop in for 20-ish minutes, Usman. Detective Pikachu, good shit. You heard it here. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Were there any other kind of cards we wanted to talk about? Trusted Pegasus. Oh yeah, Trusted Pegasus. So I actually really liked Trusted Pegasus when I first started looking at it. I think that this is the right size. There's been a 1/3 version for 3 mana. I think 2 different versions. Like there's like the Global Series version. It's like a Kirin or some sort of Spirit Pegasus thing, and then there was a Courser, I want to say, in a Corset. Man, I'm terrible with card names, but I remember the effects. Trusted Pegasus I really like. It's a flyer. It's 3 mana for a 2/2. It's fair. Picking up a creature is definitely relevant for tempo decks. But I don't think the tempo decks needed a lot of help. There aren't that many creatures that you want to pick up that are a 2-drop or 1-drop. I mean, I guess all of them are, for the most part. Most of them don't fly. So what I mean is I, when I thought about the play sequence, if I played on turn 3 and I attack on turn 4, what is it picking up? And does that make the cube better? And I think Bretak, it was a removal target when I played with it. Absolutely. And it is because it makes, in a set where flying matters and flying is really powerful, it gives something else flying. So in the context of War Limited, it makes a lot of sense to target that, and I really liked seeing how it would work in draft. I saw players taking it highly on day 2 at the Pro Tour or the Mythic Championship. I put my money in the Mythic Championship, calling it a Pro Tour bucket. So it's not that it's not a powerful card, but I think there's enough other flying, especially in white and blue, where you're ostensibly going to play this the most. That it doesn't add a lot of value, and I don't think it really brings the kind of power level that I would want to see for 3 mana in a white card.
Yeah, you might be right there. I feel like I was thinking about it in Boros more, when Boros just gets shut down and needs to do that extra damage just to get in. But yeah, it's probably too much of a corner case.
Yeah, and to be fair, Daring Skyjack and the haste 2/2 flyer for 3 mana are absolutely amazing cards in a white-red rush deck. I think it'd be a little corner casey to add, one Sky Knight Legionnaire. Yeah, Legionnaire is hard to spell. I think there's 2 N's in Legionnaire. I could see it being played in there, but there's already a pretty packed 3-drop slot for that deck anyway. There are a bunch of haste creatures, a bunch of other good white creatures to kind of play with. Make 3 tokens, is another great thing to play in that deck on turn 3, and then turn 4 attack and show Warflare. Just so I do like it there, and I think that would be the best deck for it. But I just had a really hard time seeing it play, do interesting things otherwise. Vraska's Finisher. So Running Monkeys, you want to talk about Vraska's Finisher. It's a 3/2 for 3 that requires you to have dealt damage to something to finish it off. I've never really felt like that effect's been powerful, before. In War of the Spark Limited, seeing it just nuke a Planeswalker has been awesome. So, or a 1/5, there's the 1/5 lifelink for 4, okay, cool. You blocked my 2/2 and now it goes away forever. Goodbye. I think War of the Spark Limited is absolutely a set that makes the Vraska's Finisher kind of effect shine. But I'm having trouble seeing what it would do better or do different in kind of in the Pauper cube. So I didn't know if you had anything to add to that.
No, it's just, it seemed kind of powerful. So, and my experience with it was pretty good. But it's all the Planeswalkers to it.
Yeah, I think if I had more pingers in the cube, there's some Rakdos Ixbitter. I think I remember as a card. It's like a 3-drop 1/1, and it deals 1 damage to a creature and that creature's controller. I think in a world where there's just a little bit more pinging in red, it also works well, I guess, with Pestilence in black. It's one of those cards where I think if the cube had just a little bit more setup effects for it, and it would feel a little more natural in playing it, I could totally see it. I could see it swapping for the 3/2 flash creature, right? Like same mana cost, but now I can flash in, kill your thing, and keep my 3/2. That would feel really good. But I just have a hard time seeing that setup really pay off, as often as it would be worth drafting it. Teferi's Time Twist. So this is good. This is a good transition. Let's pull up Teferi's Time Twist. There we go. So exile a permanent you control. Return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control, beginning of the next end step. If it enters as a creature, it gets a +1/+1 counter. So this be kind of like a twist on negate, right? Like, hey, I'm going to counter your removal spell and my creature's going to come back, bigger, badder, stronger. Doesn't feel... it feels very similar to the white version of this card. I'm forgetting the name of it. Let me go grab it. There's a white card that basically does this. Otherworldly Journey
Cloud.
is basically the same card, right? Yeah. So in the Pauper Cube, right? Like this would rescue Teferi's Time Twister to rescue other things, right? Like if we had land destruction or artifact destruction or enchantment destruction, it would get things. It can reset serrated arrows. I mean, everybody loves resetting serrated arrows, and as somebody who likes to play aggressive creatures, playing against serrated arrows that could be reset feels bad, man. .jpg. I like Otherworldly Journey in white because white lends itself to more aggressive, play styles, right? I was playing Otherworldly Journey in my blue-white deck because I went deep on the Enter the Battlefield sub-theme. So I drafted every Mana War I could find, and I think I had all but like 2 or 1 in the draft. And, Otherworldly Journey on that just felt great. But I needed 2 colors to do that, and it made that pairing, especially with Momentary Blink, which I didn't see, somebody else snapped it up, and it made me very sad when I found that out. But that kind of sub-theme of Enter the Battlefield, tempo, bounce stuff, felt like a good home for it. I'm not sure what I would cut for Teferi's Time Twist in blue. It feels like the right kind of card, but let me propose something different. If I was going to add Teferi's Time Twist or Displace, which one would you want to see? Multiple people are typing. While you're typing your answer, what if instead of just looking at... Oh, hey. Yeah, you added that. What if instead of just looking at Teferi's Time Twist, I said, okay, well, if we're going to make flickering kind of a thing that white and blue can do, wouldn't I add Ghostly Flicker and Displace before I would add Teferi's Time Twist? Or would I add Teferi's Time Twist and Displace and just focus on the creatures and the reduce the blowout potential? One thing, this was a discussion that was going on earlier, I think in both Pauper Cube and Patron chat, on the Discord, was Ghostly Flicker does require 2 targets, but you always have your lands to target, which are pretty safe. Displace just says up to 2 creatures, so you can always just at least just flicker your 1 Mana War and get them that way, or flicker your draw card effect. I'm thinking about these effects and maybe giving white blue a slightly different, slightly stronger identity. I've got most of the pieces of an Enter the Battlefield kind of value deck there, and I think that would be a good opportunity to re-review white, right? Like we have cards like Attended Knight, which is fine. Ordinary Pony, which is irreplaceable but feels right at home in that effect. Gleensleeve Artisan, Sandstep Outcast, Gallant Cavalry, Paladin of the Bloodstained, Chevalier. There's a bunch of stuff in white, but when I look at the bottom end of the curve, Martyr of Dusk, which needs to die, token making, Daring Skyjack. There aren't many things I want to bounce that cost less mana, and so I'm kind of torn because I don't want white to cut away from making white red an effective aggressive deck, but also if I do want to add kind of blue white flickering, blue white bouncing as kind of a value effect, then I really should have a couple more things in white that pay that off. I think even Riftwatcher is absolutely one of the best things to pay that off. Thraben Inspector, yeah, That's like the 1/1 drop that you would want in that deck. But even Rift Watcher, I needed that card desperately in my Blink deck, and I'm wondering if that's where, life gain effect should get looked at again. There's the 2-drop that's a 2/1 gain 4 when it enters the battlefield. That's a pretty good way to buy a ton of time against a burn deck. You flicker that once or twice. Basically you get 50% of your life total as a lone missionary. Yeah, as padding. That seems pretty good. Not counting whatever it can block and trade with at some point. So that's kind of where my headspace is at. I think white blue can really lean into the flickering, bouncing kind of effect. And I need to take a look at the white creatures to see, where can a 2-drop overlap with more than one deck. Yeah, Cloud Shift used to be in the cube. Just straight up flicker a creature you control for 1 mana. So the pieces are there, and the pieces have been in before, and I like them. But I've just never seriously looked at structuring white blue to kind of really enable that. Ooh, Thunderdrake. So, Thunderdrake. I don't know how many times I'm casting 2 spells a turn in the cube on like turns 5 and 6. I didn't actually take time to observe that. So in thinking about Thunderdrake, you are maybe looking to, yeah, absolutely. I think that those are the obvious decks to pay that off. Here's a question I have. Let's say you're in a pack with Thunderdrake, right? You're probably going to take Muldrifter or Harmonic Wall over it, maybe Griff Vanguard. But are you taking, would you take Shimmering Glasskite over it? Watcher in the Mist? Soul of the Rapids? So why would you take it over Soul of the Rapids, Usman? Or what makes Thunderdrake better than Soul of the Rapids there? That's fair. Is it the 2 toughness? We don't like souls because it just dies to stuff too easily. It's still a 3-power hexproof flyer. It is scary if you don't have anything in the air. I've died to it in white red without my flyer sticking around. But I can't get behind Thunderdrake. I just wonder if there's any other blue 4-drop that I would like. Yeah, Stripe Weaver Winder is very, very good in blue, and I don't think it's gonna ever come out. Cycling and a 5/5 hexproof feels good, man. Duck gif. Card I had a really good experience with was Wretched Griff. In my white blue deck, I needed a big finisher, and actually it worked out really well where I could cash in one of my 8 redundant mana wars for a 4 mana 3/4 flyer that drew a card. That's just an aside, but Thunderdrake, is there anything else at 4 mana in blue we would want to play instead of Thunderdrake? Let's hit Scryfall. I always like these searches because I find cards I forget exist. So I'm looking at some of the creatures. We could get Aven Fleetwing, which is a 2/2 flying hexproof for 4 mana. Aven Initiate is a 3/2 with Embalm, so it replaces itself. You can get it back. Ghost Ship. Do we want a 2/4 flying regenerator? I think Ghost Ship's very cute. I wish I could play it. I think I think it would be more meme than menacing. Yeah, I'm scrolling through Scryfall right now with blue with flying and convert mana cost of 4. You know, we used to have Lotus Path Jin, which is I guess just not as good as Thunder Drake, I guess. Phantom Monster. Phantom Monster was in for a while. Forget when it came back out. Stormbound Geist. But it can only block creatures with flying. That is actually super relevant in the cube, and it basically it makes it nowhere near as good as some of the other flyers. Spirewinder. Yeah, Storm Sculptor would be great in like the white blue recycle my own enter the battlefield stuff. I kind of like where Storm Sculptor goes. Spirewinder. It just becomes a 3/4 if you have Ascend. It's actually you should probably look at that again. I mean, I think Thunder, Thundering Flyer. Can't even remember the name of it now. Thunder Drake. I think Thunder Drake is a little easier to get to 3/4 than Spirewinder, but the fact that you don't have to do anything for Spirewinder, you just have to play it late enough, might matter. I think Moose Drake is too weak. You know, a 1/3 flying to draw a card for 4 mana. I feel like there's much better payoffs. But I do like the idea of Flicker. Like if it was a 2/1 for 1 blue, it'd probably be too good. But that would fit much better. Yeah. I mean, there's limited options, but I can get behind Thunder Drake for Soul of the Rapids. I I think 3 power hexproof is super scary, and I think the decks that can protect it, like blue black, where it's got bounce and removal and lots of ways of keeping the sky clear, is good. But I'm not opposed to getting rid of hexproof. I think hexproof is one of the more obnoxious things that a creature can have. So if we wanna play with thunder, as long as we don't get burned, I'm down with that. Several people are typing. It's like my favorite thing to see on a Discord server. People were typing and then they're not. On-Crop Invader, Spellgorger weird. So I'm almost warm to On-Crop Invader. I actually had it on my super short list. I think if it was free to sacrifice, it would be very, very close. Meat breathing. Am I mouth breathing? Is that what's going on? I'm sorry. Multiple people are typing again. The first strike plus sacrificing a creature feels like an appropriate payoff. I found On-Crop Invader just impossible to block. in meat breathing. This is name given to the PPR. Okay, I didn't get a chance to watch that. So that makes much more sense, and that sounds very much like something that would come from the pre-release. The payoff is good, and I really like it. Having to pay 1 mana just radically changes how you play with it. And I'm not sure that makes it good. I'm tired now. What I mean is I think paying for 1 can hurt the aggressive red decks more. The deck that wants this most is the 15 mana, the 15 land, red white or red black, just all in, all the 1 drops, 2 drops, 3 drops, burn spells, and that's it. I think it's really hard to play with a cost to sacrifice versus the black sacrifice payoffs, which don't have a cost, right? Like I can just throw this creature away. I don't have to kind of dance around or play chicken with the mana cost, right? Like, on turn 4, you can attack with an on-crop invader if you have any extra creatures lying around. But if you want to play a 4-drop, and there's a ton of great 4-drops in red, I think it gets much dicier to play with it. That's what gives me pause. It's definitely a strong card, and I definitely really like it. I'll let you guys type some responses to that. The Spellgorger Weird is just radically different. So Spellgorger Weird just sits there and piles up, but it has no evasion. No way of being a big threat. I can kind of chump it with a 1/1 all day long. I can bounce it with other a bunch of spells. I can kill it easily. As a baseline creature, it's I think weaker than On-Crop Invader. Spellgorger Weird feels awesome in War of the Spark Limited because you have a bunch of planeswalkers you're casting, and the removal is much slower and weaker than you have in other sets. Versus On-Crop Invader, which, yes, has all the same weaknesses, but I think pressures much, much faster and plays into the, having Grim Initiate in the cube, having a Butcher Ghoul in the cube. I can see the play sequence working much better. I think Spellgorger Weird will turn into just a removal magnet, and it's never going to be that big. If it gets big enough to be a problem, there's way more answers for it in the cube than in War of the Spark Limited, and I think that is a great example of a card like Vraska's Finisher, where it shines super bright in that limited format, but in the context of the cube, I think it would shine less. Versus On-Crop Invader, which is pretty close to Splatter Thug, but with a lot more upside. And an Unleashed Splatter Thug was pretty hard to block for the longest time. It's gotten a little easier now. And that's kind of why it made its way out, is it couldn't be on the defense as well, versus, On-Crop Invader, which can at least trade up. You can throw a 1/1 token away and trade up into an X4, or something else, which matters on the block, but for the most part you get to attack much better. My biggest question is what would we cut for On-Crop Invader? What in red is just weak enough to get the boot, so we can put in our meat breathing Minotaur. Because I did spend some time looking at that, and I didn't come to a good answer. I really couldn't find a card that just felt like an obvious swap. So Brazen Wolves. Counterpoint. Crunchy Boy, Raging Crunch, feels really good and is very, very similar to Brazen Wolves. If that's true, then it stands to reason Brazen Wolves still feels really good. I guess my question would be is, do we not like Brazen Wolves because it doesn't feel like it does anything else? It's just a 4/3 and it has to attack for the best upside, or is Brazen Wolves just a card that sits on the sidelines? Because I've always been happy to play it and attack with it. It just feels really good to curve out with, and I've never been unhappy to have a 4/3 attacker for 3. It does block worse. This is true. But it doesn't need a friend to attack. Cards are weird. I looked at like Interflame Acolyte, Minotaur Skullcleaver. Should we cut one of the other 3-drop haste, granting things? And I don't know. I think I like both of those cards, and they put a lot of pressure on opponents. Hissing Iguanar is a really good setup card. Gearper Gearcrafter makes a flyer. Fervent Cathar is haste and a combat trick. Keeps a blocker out of the way for the turn. We just added Spark Spitter, which is, a ridiculously fun card. I'm kind of scared to see when somebody can make the most of that. Goblin Heel Cutter and Voldaren Duelist are both very similar cards at 4 mana. One lets you repeat with Heel Cutter. You can dash in, versus Duelist, which is just kind of a one-time effect, like the Fervent Cathar. There isn't a lot of obvious swaps. I mean, I guess we have 4 different 2-drops that make tokens. There's Goblin Instigator, Krenko's Command, Mogwar Marshal, and Dragon Fodder. Is that too many? Should we cut one and add a payoff effect for it at 3? Kind of keep the curve low. None of the swaps that I bring myself to feel like the obvious one. And I'm also not sure, again, there's a lot of instant speed removal. Phyrexian Ghoul's good, but I also haven't seen it pay off a lot. Now we want to mana sink into it as well. I don't know. Yeah, how many of the make 2+ Goblin cards I was playing? Yeah, I think it's great if you've got a bunch of cards that make creatures and tokens. You just get to put a lot of pressure in. I wish I had an easy answer. I really like On-Crop Invader. I do. I just have a hard time seeing where it fits in best.
I think the mana cost is a convincing point, though. I hadn't really thought about it, but I think it's a good point.
We just cut all the easy answers for other cards. We did run a monkeys. Yeah, and it's super subtle, but from playing with Phyrexian Ghoul and kind of the sacrifice effects, if I had to pay for it each time, it's why I didn't play Spark Reaper. So I really, really like Spark Reaper. It's basically the same uncommon that was in Dominaria. It was like the Thallid, whatever, that you pay 2 mana, sack something, draw a card. But this costs 3 mana to draw a card. You got to trade in a creature and pay 3 mana to gain 1 life and draw a card, and it's just way too slow. If you have enough time to throw away extra tokens to gain 1 life and draw a card, you're probably already winning. It's just not a good conversion rate. Versus if this was maybe not free, but just 1 mana, I think it'd be much, much closer. Because in that case, yeah, I'd love to keep an extra mana up and chump block, trade it in, gain life and draw a card instead of taking damage or just chump blocking for a turn. Okay. This does have the upside of being able to sacrifice itself for its own effect. Yeah, Thallid Soothsayer. Yeah, this was 4 mana for basically the same card, and it was an uncommon, and it was an absolute house in Dominaria draft. I think the difference of 2 mana to 3 mana is pretty huge. Spark Reaper is just okay in War of the Spark Limited, and it's just too much for the cube. But that also tells you just how 1 mana different, 2 to 3, and even though it comes down a turn earlier, just that extra mana to pay for it just adds up really quick. I'll let people catch up typing. I love drafting Thallid Soothsayer kind of decks in Dominaria. Just Dirtle. Give me Slimefoot and some token making, and I'll go to town. Yes, Active Treason. On-crop Invader would be a really good reason to add Active Treason again, because that makes a really strong turn 4. Take your dude, attack, throw it away. Yeah, I think Active Treason is on the very, very short list of cards to take another look at soon. Are there any other War of the Spark cards that you want to beat me over the head with? D-Contest is typing. And Rick Rocks. Also in blue. Already taken care of with the other draw twos. So I wouldn't be opposed to trying to weave in a little bit more raw card draw. In blue, I think it's a good fit, but 4C is, has been around for a while, and it's just okay. I think drawing 2 for 4 mana, even with Scry 4, is just not worth taking turn 4 off. And that's ultimately kind of the challenge with a lot of the draw 2 cards is almost all the good ones are sorcery. The ones that cost 3 mana I think are more interesting, or the ones that are instant speed are more interesting, and we've added some of those, and kind of played with them over the years. Some of the repeatable card draw, Una's Grace was a card that I really liked for a while because it basically let you cycle lands away at instant speed in blue, which felt really relevant late in the game, but never really got traction. I think it was just a little. Just not fast enough, just not early enough to be a payoff. If Tamiyo's Epiphany was an instant, I think it would be a radically different conversation. It's one of the ways that blue stays in the game is being able to bounce at instant speed or threaten to counter something. And even though there's not that many counter effects, it makes it so you can reasonably play into blue's open mana and not expect to be punished, but it makes it so much more punishing when you do. I just don't see taking turn 4 off as a good answer. If this isn't be close to fact or fiction, yeah, you get to look at 4 cards and decide if you want to draw any of those or the next 2. So you dig 6 cards deep. Just a radically different play style and sequence if it's an instant or sorcery. And I just don't want to take... I just don't see taking a turn off to do this in the cube. Yeah, thanks for hanging out, Rick Rocks. I really appreciate it. It should be up probably tomorrow. I'm going to think about some of the feedback that I've gotten here tonight and maybe make some final tweaks. All the artifacts are bad. The closest is the Geode that scries for 1, but all the good mana ramp is 2 in the cube. So... So unless we have any other War the Spark cards or kind of other really important pressing cards, like we've hit the Act of Treason, we've hit Ghostly, Flicker, Displace, we've hit it's a weird earnings call. It is. This was a weird earnings call. And I get challenged by the analyst to defend what the Pauper Cube is doing. I like it. I think that's a really good way of putting it. So unless there's other war cards to talk about, I do want to talk about some silver bordered card feedback and the way it was distilled down to, I think, the fundamental reason silver bordered seems so divisive, which was like an epiphany moment for me and really gave me a lot of pause to think about silver bordered in the cube. I just don't want to preempt like actual fun card discussion with like a somber, maybe I've been wrong moment. Perkins is typing. He's typing. He's typing. He's typing. What is he typing? He's probably typing to tell me I want to hear it. Better not get rid of Carnivorous Death Parrot. I actually have a tweet lined up to embed in the update where somebody pack 3 picked one to Carnivorous Death Parrot just because it was that funny for them. So I love Carnivorous Death Parrot. So the feedback I got, basically the nutshell of what I was given was that, you know, when you pick up my cube and you start looking over all the cards, it's, you know, and I'm paraphrasing what they said to me. So this is not my opinion. I'm paraphrasing an opinion given to me. Is that, you know, the cube is very curated, a lot of care, a lot of time is put into it. You know, obviously I've got foil cards and sign cards and lots of stuff. And then there's these silver bordered cards that feel out of place, you know, juxtaposed with the obviously very serious and curated and traditional kind of feel for Magic. The silver bordered cards don't feel the same. You know, Carnivorous Death Parrot, I think, is arguably the most reasonable card of the uncards. You know, it feels almost magical. It's an evil parrot that comes to attack you. That's a pretty mean card, but obviously it has this upkeep effect that is super weird if you don't understand what it means. Squirrel Dealer, right? You point to someone and you're like, can you give me, you know, do you like squirrels, dog? And like, maybe they'll answer yes, maybe they'll answer no. You don't know. The way it was put was kind of twofold. One is that the silver cards often don't feel thematically kind of similar to, you know, obviously they're wacky and weird and kind of out there. So, you know, they kind of contrast with the feel of the cube overall. But more importantly, several of the uncards have RNG that doesn't feel controllable, right? Carnivorous Death Parrot, you just tap it in your upkeep and you're fine, right? Like, you say the thing, there's no downside to it. It's super controllable. It's all above board. But Squirrel Dealer, like, if you ask somebody, you know, in back-to-back games, they might answer differently just because they feel like screwing around with you. Do you play it by the card, or do you play it with the house rule that just you get 2 1/1s? And that's why that card's in there. You know, Ordinary Pony, exile another non-horse creature and, you know, flicker it. There's no comparable effect for that in common yet. I hope they print something at common. You know, like Felidar Guardian is as close as you get in white, you know, and that's an uncommon that does other stuff, but it's controllable versus, go to jail, which was just literal roulette, just craps. Like, you're just rolling 2 dice and you're doing the thing. Selfie preservation, I set the cube up so basically all the lands work with it. But if you don't, or you don't think about that, do you just treat it like a rampant growth, or do you hold your opponent accountable for finding a land with a, tree on it? And who decides that the tree is on it? Is it the opponent? Is it the player? Is it the cube owner? So that was kind of the meat of the feedback was, hey, some of the RNG just isn't controllable. That's not fun. Hey, I understand that. I totally get that as a World of Warcraft player. Boy, do I get RNG not being in your control, not feeling good. I do. I get it. But in conjunction with, it doesn't feel like they are curated to the same degree that the other cards in the cube are. That's what stood out to me, is that does that altogether mean that silver border cards don't belong in the cube? I haven't come to a conclusion on that question. Obviously I'm still a fan of silver border cards and I like them a lot. And I cut, a white removal spell that was, much more varied for I think an empirically stronger removal spell. That's also a creature. Like, you can actually interact with it way more than you could interact with Go to Jail. That change was on its own merits. It wasn't, based on this feedback, but that was kind of the unfeedback, and I think that was the most succinct way I had putting with it in is, do I need to reconsider just is the RNG-ness of the cards really should be considered more of a determining factor in whether a silver border card makes it or not? And like that's the difference between like foul play, which might as well be black bordered, right? Like it's just Kasmina's Transmutation, but costs 1 more. Like, foul play is just Kasmina's Transmutation. Nothing really wacky about it at this point. Foul play spelled like the duck. Running monkeys. It's a pun. It's a beautiful pun, and I love it, which is why I wanted to play the cards so badly. But, it's a thing where, like, foul play versus go to jail, right? Like, one is no RNG, feels just like an everyday Magic card, right? Versus, high RNG, super weird, you're rolling dice. You don't do that with, like, Magic cards. That's not what Magic cards do, Maybe you flip a coin, but, like, that's, like, a weird thing that Commander players do. That's not, like, a thing that we do in Standard. Not since what, like Weatherlight was legal, and there was, like, that blue-red Djinn that you flipped coins for. So that's, that gave me an opportunity to gave me the insight to kind of frame and go, that is why some people are so divisive about the silver border cards. And, like, I get it. It was like the aha moment. It's not that they don't like fun. It's that they don't feel the same as the other cards in the cube, especially when they're high RNG. Yeah, Rakdos the Showstopper. Yeah, there's your standard representative for coin flipping. Like, card's a lot of fun in Commander, by the way, when there's like 30 creatures on the battlefield. It's so good. But yeah, so I don't know if any of you want to echo on that or add to that about the unfeedback, but that was what really struck with me, and I really appreciated kind of what was laid out, how it was laid out, and where it led me to think is I should at the least re-review the silver border cards and reconsider the randomness and whether that randomness is worth the headache and payoff that they bring. And that's kind of what I concluded I should do, given that clarity from kind of the other side of the silver bordered coin, because we like puns here. Multiple people are typing. You can talk too. Like, totally welcome to. Like, it won't ruin anything. I'm always in suspense when I see people typing. It's like, It's actually the worst when I see somebody typing and they're typing for a while and then they must have decided they didn't want to say what they were going to say and then it just disappears and like nothing appears. You know, it's definitely a feel bad when I'm like, great, I'm waiting for this awesome feedback and then it doesn't come.
I'm okay with the silver border stuff. We just automatically play with the house rules, so they feel less like silver border because we just tell people what it's going to do.
Yeah, and when you read it, like you just get the upside. Like that's how the cards are supposed to work, and that's how they're evaluated to work. But
except for what was that white one where you could choose whether to bounce something or not?
Chivalry, where you've got to compliment your opponent.
Yeah, and so you could you could choose whether to compliment them or not, and then you'd get the bounce effect or not. Is that one still in?
Yeah, that was a card I was really hoping was going to table in my last draft. I was in that kind of deck, and I didn't get it back, and it was very sad.
I guess that's the most unny card that I would want to see in the cube.
Yeah, and so I think comparing that to Squirrel Dealer, right, I think is the most fundamental way to compare the RNG, right? Like, Chivalry, I'm choosing, and I'm in total control of whether this thing happens or not. Squirrel the Dealer, by reading the card, I'm not in control at all. And there's a huge difference between making a 1/1 for 1 and making 2 1/1s for 1, which is the point of Squirrel Dealer. But Magic players like their rules, and if they read the card and play it by how the card's written, they're kind of at the whim of someone else's randomness, and I think that leads to, you know, some of the feel bad negative situations that have come from people that don't like silver bordered cards.
Yeah, Chevalier could basically just say "you may," and it would be exactly the same card.
Yes. Yeah, and there's no other big flying white creature that lets you bounce something. Like, it's kind of unique, even though it could totally be a silver border card with that may. Not in control of selfie preservation either. The cube owner is, but the players aren't. Yeah, and especially if you just throw random lands in, and you're like, well, there will be enough lands with trees in them, and you know, well, there are always trees in the forest cards for sure. So like, it's always going to be a go get a forest card, but that's what makes selfie preservation nice, is that it's rampant growth. You can get any land. That's how I feel it should be played. How much PSA you want to incorporate in your play. Yeah, and I don't like having to require that. You know, I think any good cube owner, you know, any cube owner sharing their cube with kind of players drafting it the first time should share some of the high level archetypes. Like, what am I getting myself into, right? Like, if I'm going to draft War of the Spark, somebody's going to tell me what the basic archetypes are, right? And that seems like a pretty reasonable limit. But if I've got to explain that, you know, hey, each silver border card gives you maximum upside, you know, you've got to read it to figure out what that upside is. Oh, and also Ashnod's coupon is in the cube, even though it's not a common, because we like to joke around and have somebody go get a drink. Oh, and also Cheaty Face is in the cube, even though it's an uncommon, but you can cheat it into play. Like, there's diminishing returns on adding the upfront information disclosures.
Cheaty Face bounces between all four of my cubes at random, so people don't really know where it is.
Played like a true Cheaty Face. I love it. So yeah, so that would be one of the takeaways is, what are the silver bordered cards you hate the most in the cube and love the most in the cube, and why? That'll be kind of an upcoming discussion in Pauper Cube, because I'm sure if I start talking about cutting or adding silver bordered cards, there will be some quick feedback, and that's kind of what I'm looking for is, you know, people are going to shoot from the hip, and I think that's good. You know, I want that top of mind thought for it. Yeah, Squirrel Dealer is definitely a card I feel the least great about from the RNG perspective. So they better give me a better card in black bordered in Modern Horizons, please. Please, Wizards. WMC Duff is typing. So, other than kind of other feedback that Oubliette, I think this is where they're going to print Oubliette. They'll put Oubliette in, invite Gavin to this. I think if Gavin liked, I think he's seen my cube before, and I think Gavin is vaguely aware of it. But I think Gavin has much better things to do at, 8 p.m. Eastern on a Saturday. Gavin is a very busy guy. But if they don't put Oubliette in common in Modern Horizons, I'd say eat an Oubliette, but I really don't want to eat a Magic card. But I would donate an Oubliette to a worthy person who wants one for their flavor of the Pauper cube. I would gladly do that if they don't put Oubliette in Modern Horizons. Everyone eats 8 Magic cards in their lifetime. Yeah, it's like the spiders. In fact, I think the spiders drag the Magic cards over. I've eaten at least 2 Penumbra spiders. They're good. I don't have anything else for tonight. We did go 2 hours, but I think we hit on a lot more, war cards than I thought we would. War of the Spark is definitely a good set. They really hit it out of the park. Spider spawning, yeah. Everyone eats 8 spider cards unless they're BDM, in which case they've eaten 1 spider spawning and flashed it back from the inside. BDM is just full of spiders. I just want to thank everybody again. Your feedback and consistent kind of way of breaking down things that I've been thinking about with the cube, or thinking about doing to the cube, and being able to shape that for the better has been awesome. Without the cube community, I wouldn't keep doing this, because it's just so much fun to get into all these details, challenge my thinking, and kind of explain my thinking out to see if it makes sense, right? Like if it doesn't pass the test, and sometimes we disagree. I think Omni and Usman have some pretty specific views on cube that don't always mesh with mine, but ultimately I think we've helped encourage each other, and all of our cubes have gotten better, reflecting on kind of different ways to solve the same problems. It really does come down to these discussions and reviews, whether it's live like this or in a bunch of chats, that I get the most out of making each update. And Perkins, yeah, I'm actually looking to be back in the DC area. My wife is actually looking to be back there next year teaching, so I may be pretty close by a couple weekends. We'll have to connect around that. I know you're on the Virginia side, where we'd be on the Maryland side. So thank you for the invite. If any of you are going to be at Mythic Championship Barcelona, I'll probably be there. And it looks like I'll make a stopover in Providence over Memorial Day weekend. So for Grand Prix Providence. So if you're on the road and you see me, don't be a stranger. Say hi. But I wanted to thank you again for taking the time to look over everything in War of the Spark.